to Jewish Life, the show about people and issues in Judaism and some of the secrets you missed out in Hebrew school. L'chaim, l'chaim, to life to you, everyone. That's the expression we say when we toast one another, when we meet at a wedding, at a bar mitzvah, or at an ordinary Shabbos table or Shabbos afternoon in shul during the kiddush. Take a little wine, we toast one another. When we make kiddush, we welcome the Shabbos. We do it with a cup of wine. When we say goodbye to the Shabbos, we do the Havdalah service, again with a cup of wine. Wine has been and is an integral part of Jewish life. So when I was thinking about the holiday seasons, when wine plays a major role in the holiday, I couldn't have thought of a better guest to invite to discuss winemaking than a personal friend of mine who grew up together with me in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. And I remember when it used to come Passover time, and we used to look for a good wine for Passover, and there was my buddy, Yossi Zakon, who turned out to be the proprietor and the founder and ultimately the winemaker of Kosher Wine Company. Welcome, Yossi, to the show. And l'chaim to you.
L'chaim, and thank you.
You got involved in winemaking as a necessity, so to speak, as I remember. Tell us a little about that history.
Necessity would be a pretty strong term to use. There was kosher wine available when I got involved in kosher wine. It's just that most of the kosher wine that was available at that time was the strictly Manischewitz, Shapiro, and Kedem wine, which were Concords and Malagas, which wasn't too pleasing to the taste at that time.
And they're very sweet.
It wasn't just only the sweetness, it was a kind of heaviness to it that would make you feel ill usually afterwards.
There was something synonymous. Kosher wine is heavy, sweet wine.
Yes.
Why was that?
And the reason for that was, I would trace back, is after we were put in exile approximately 2,000 years ago, the Jewish people have lost the art of winemaking for these last 2,000 years. We didn't really own vineyards in Russia or wherever we were at that time, or in Poland, and grow grapes. So we didn't really have the art of winemaking. And at the turn of the century, when Jews started migrating to America, and they found all these Concord grapes growing here, and it was basically used for jam and jelly, so the Jews decided, listen, we need to have wine, not only jam and jelly and juice. Let's turn it into wine and make it sweet, and we'll be at least palatable, and we'll have wine. And that's really how this concept of Jewish wine having to be kosher and being sweet
came into
initiated.
being.
Yeah, came into being.
And you felt that you were not satisfied.
Well, at that time, I would say when I was in school, learning in yeshiva at that time, we've been always taught that wine is an integral part of our history, of our customs, of our culture, and wine is something that should be served to kings and on festive occasions. And I'm saying to myself, if that's the case, how come every time we make kiddush Friday night, or comes a holiday, and we drink a cup of the wine, we feel ill afterwards, and we're not as happy as we should be after drinking a cup of wine. So it was either someone isn't telling me the truth, or we just don't know how to make wine as kosher winemakers. And I started doing research and investigating initially.
And what did you discover?
And I discovered that wine isn't just the sweet Concord wine that we've been accustomed to, but wine is a totally different concept than the kosher Concord that's available. Most of the world does not have kosher Concord wine, because Concord grapes are unique only to this part of the hemisphere, this in New York area basically, where we have this cold climate where we can grow Concord grapes, whereas if you go to California or to Israel or to most of the European grape growing areas, Concord grapes will not grow there. So there they have the vinifera grapes, which are the Cabernets and the Chardonnays. And I started experimenting with, originally was with California grapes that were shipped from California to New York. And then
Where did you experiment that?
Oh, at home, in the basement. My father's, well, I was still at home in school, in the basement. And And then I started realizing, and it was basically a lot of studying and a lot of research into the whole concept of wine that I've done, and finding out more and more about wines. I was at a slight disadvantage, to say the least, is that I wasn't tasting any non-kosher wines. I mean, we were only allowed to drink kosher wines, and there were very few kosher vinifera wines. The only one that really produced any kosher vinifera wines was Carmel at that time, coming out of Israel, and the quality of that was far from being comparable to anything out there in the non-kosher world. And that led me to purchase some grapes out of Long Island that was just then starting to be a vinifera grape growing region in New York State, out in Long Island. And I bought some Chardonnay grapes, and I most likely, as far as I know, was the first person to produce a kosher Chardonnay. And at first, when I came out with a kosher Chardonnay and I presented it to the kosher clientele, they didn't really know how to react to it.
Didn't receive it well.
They didn't receive it well. They couldn't understand it because they
Yeah, I
weren't
remember
accustomed
people making faces, tasting.
to this wine. So, and I was lucky enough that I had a few friends in the non-kosher industry who tasted the wines and they said, "Wow, this is really great wine." And that one thing led to another, and that created a lot of publicity for myself in the industry. Whereas, kosher wine could be made differently than the way it has been made for the last 50, 60, 70 years.
So that's
Prior to 1981, because 1981 is the year that I started the winery. At that time, I founded the winery, and I was again also the youngest person in the United States to own a bonded winery.
Where do you go from there?
And we started out with 5,000 gallons, 3,000 gallons, 5,000 gallons, and today I'm pleased to say we're close to 20,000 gallons, which is very nice, and it's been a great success, and it's been very well accepted in the kosher world and in the non-kosher world as well.
Who was a clientele for your wine?
Anyone that needs wine, basically.
So you've in a way altered the taste of wine for the kosher industry.
Basically was the beginning of the revolution, and after I came out with the wines is when there started to be a proliferation of vinifera, good quality kosher wines coming out of California and Israel as well, and Europe. But it was really, I was one of the pioneers in this field to bring it out at that time.
Very, very interesting history of a lone winemaker, and we'll hear some more and about the history of wine in Jewish life after this message.
It's holiday time again. Get your free holiday guide for this holiday and all future holidays. Call our toll-free number, 1-888-LIFE-CHAI. That's 1-888-543-3242. Or email to us on the internet at holiday@cablejew.org for your free guides to all Jewish holidays. Even the call is free. 1-888-LIFE-CHAI. We wish you a very happy holiday.
Okay, you alluded earlier on to this history of wine being a central part of Jewish life. Take us a little tour through Jewish history. How important is wine to Judaism?
Well, wine has been very important to Judaism, and we can really trace it back to the Bible right in the beginning when Adam was told not to eat from the Eitz Hadas,
From the tree of knowledge.
And
You mean to say it wasn't an apple?
Rashi is a strong believer in the opinion that it was grapes, or was wine for that matter, that led to...
You mean so Adam was trying to make kiddush?
Mm-hmm. That was really what the Eitz Hadas. And that's really where the first time that we find that wine is brought into the Bible, and then we find it throughout, going down, We also find that one of the most important times of wine consumption by the Jewish people were in the time of the temple. And that was when we used to bring our sacrifices. It was very important that they would pour wine on the altar.
Mm-hmm.
And this wine had to be very pure at that time. And we knew that if the wine contained any water or sugar or any additives, it would not be permitted to be used at the altar.
So really
So-
using sweet wines was like a cheat.
Well, that would not be permitted to be used then during that
The
period.
time of the temple.
And in those times, the Jews were very knowledgeable in the production of wine. I mean, we were in the land of Israel, and we owned our own vineyards, and it was kind of euphoric times, especially during the first temple. And it was an important commodity. And matter of fact, I was just reading in the Talmud that there's a halacha brought down with regard to wine, and that is if, for example, I as a wine seller has sold you wine, and the wine that I have sold you was good quality wine, and then 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later the wine soured. So the law is that you have no right to return it to me as that I sold you bad wine. And the Talmud brings down and says that when it comes to wine, there's the strong opinion that the mazel, your mazel,
The
is
luck.
your luck is what controls the wine the wine. And if you have good luck, you'll have good wine. And if unfortunately you sold it to someone who doesn't have good luck, the wine will be bad.
Uh-oh.
So
So before
we
you
just-
purchase
we
a good
just-
bottle of wine, make sure you have good luck as well, not to ruin it.
So we find it, and we find many different things about wine. We also find that wine has been alluded to. It's been brought down that God, when He created the world, put away wine for us for the time of Mashiach. That when Mashiach will come, and it's called Yain HaMeshumer.
Preserved wine.
Right, and when Mashiach will come, we will be served this wine and say l'chaim on this wine together with Mashiach.
Well, an aged wine.
Quite an aged wine. It's being aged in one of the best wine cellars, I guess, and that's called Gan Eden.
In paradise, in the
paradise.
Garden of Eden.
Yes.
Where else? I know wine is used like, there's like, probably you can go through Jewish customs. When a baby is born,
Right. This is something that is very unique to Judaism, whereas that, today, especially in today's day and age, where we have this anti-alcohol situation, where you got to be,
sober.
and sober, and it's not that. It is something that we should always take in consideration. God forbid, you should never drink and drive, and people should definitely be aware of it. But there are a lot of healthy benefits to wine, and as we've seen in the 60 Minutes, where there was the French paradox, where they've shown that percentage-wise, the French have been eating a lot more high-fat saturated foods than we do in the U.S., yet their heart attack rates are much lower than here in the States, and for the simple reason they find is that they drink a lot more wine.
Yeah, for breakfast I think they have a cup of wine too.
And so it does have health, a lot of health purposes to it, and we do need to educate people, how to drink wine, and it's not just something to drink to get drunk and that's it. And the unique thing about it is that by Judaism we find that a child that's just 8 days old, gets to drink wine.
At the
And
bris.
That's right. He's just 8 days old, and when they make him the bris, one of the things that the Moel does is put some of the wine that the blessing was made on his lips. So it is an integral part basically from when the baby is born.
At the wedding ceremony,
And
under
then
the
as we
chuppah.
go through, it's needed for the wedding. It's needed for. It is also needed. Every Shabbos, every Friday night, you have to. The halacha is that we have to make kiddush on wine. Questions if you don't have wine, if you can make it on bread, but what you have to do is to say it on wine.
And on holidays, you have to have an extra cup of wine, even besides the kiddush.
Right. And especially when it comes to the holiday of Passover, where we drink 4 cups of wine. And the purpose of drinking the 4 cups of wine is, as we know, is to allude to this type of grandiose kind of freedom that we're celebrating. And that is celebrating it in a happy occasion and drinking wine and being happy with friends in a kosher social environment. And doing a mitzvah of Pesach, we are supposed to drink 4 cups of wine. That is a requirement.
Well, we'd be remiss if we forget Purim, which is also a holiday which we're accustomed to having a couple of drinks of a couple of cups of wine.
That's true. And Purim, the purpose of drinking wine is to get drunk. Whereas
Be a little careful. Don't drink and drive, even on Purim.
right.
Okay. Let's get back to your making of the wine. You started off from the basement. You also were awarded medals of honor. How far did it go?
Well, originally when I started the wine company in 1981, we started producing wines, all different types of wines. It was in 1983 that my wines won medals at national wine competitions at that time. And Rabbi Krinsky, who's the secretary of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, so he suggested that he'll take my medals into the Rebbe at that time. And I told him, fine, you know, that would be very nice. And I gave him the medals, and so happened that he brought it into the Rebbe. And the Rebbe, he came back telling me that the Rebbe was holding in his hand, looking at it, and suggesting that I should see to it that it should be advertised and publicized, the fact that my wines won these medals. And that time, you have to understand, I mean, my budget was very limited, and I really couldn't afford much advertising. It was basically word of mouth that was getting my wine around. But as everything with the Rebbe, when the Rebbe says something, you can basically feel it considered done.
You can bet on it.
It has been done. And that year, I had an avalanche of publicity coming my way, starting with the New York Times and the Daily News and the Newsday and CNN. I mean, it was just anyone or anything that had any type of media.
And what did they say? What was their? What were the critics saying?
Oh, they found the whole idea of kosher wine being made other than the sweet Manischewitz style fascinating to them and fascinating to people, and also the personal aspect of this young person coming out of Crown Heights, which isn't known to be a viticulture area, to be so knowledgeable and so successful in his production.
Well, when we come back, I want to give us a little description. How do we make wine?
Given Chabad's continuing effort to educate, as the Passover holiday draws near, children from all backgrounds are treated to a miniature operation of a traditional matzah bakery at Chabad centers throughout the country. They are given a lesson in history about their biblical ancestors who made a hasty departure from Egypt without giving their bread enough time to rise. Children and their families leave the premises of the model bakery, they are given the special round shmura matzahs baked in Crown Heights for use at their seders. The water and especially supervised flour must be kept from becoming moist and are kept in separate rooms and then mixed in a bowl, and in rapid succession they are hand kneaded. Flattened by carefully sanded and inspected rolling pins, they are then perforated and taken to the oven, and they are baked all within the span of 18 minutes as required by Jewish law. This is the fire of Passover redemption.
Well, you started off in the basement, not in the professional big winery. Take us for a tour. How do we make the wine? I'm sure our audience would like to know more about it. Where do you start?
Okay, the truth is it starts all in the vineyard. I mean, it really depends on the quality of grapes that you will purchase and that you can get your hands on. I mean, you can be the best winemaker, but if you don't have quality grapes, you're not going to have a quality wine. And you have to be very prudent and careful and knowing the farmers that you're going to purchase the grapes from and the people that are growing the grapes for you, that they're growing it under the best of circumstances that they can attain at that time. It has a lot to do with the weather, with nature. One year we can have excellent weather. Let's say, for example, the 1993 vintage happened to be an excellent vintage in New York State. We had beautiful weather throughout the whole summer, no rain, very nice warm weather, and we had excellent quality grapes. I mean, the wine basically made itself. I really didn't have to do anything except babysit. Whereas this past year, 1994 vintage, I'm having a very difficult time producing the wines because of the cold summer we had in the beginning, if you all remember, and then we had many rains, and the grapes just did not develop as I would expect and hope for it to develop. And this is where my expertise comes in, and I try to...
Picking a good grape.
It's not only in picking the grapes and nudging along the fermentation. Now basically when you get the grapes, you got to crush them. And when you crush them, you release the juice in the grapes, and that is in turn what brings the juice in contact with yeasts that are on top of the skins. And once the yeasts come in contact with the juice, which has been within the grape all along, the yeasts start eating at the juice and fermenting the sugars that are in that grape juice and turning that into alcohol.
So the initial fluids, the juices that come out of grapes are just a plain juice.
Basically grape juice.
Non-alcoholic.
Right. It's basically grape juice that will turn into wine just by letting it stand. The problem is that if the conditions aren't right, it will turn into vinegar or it won't turn into wine the way it should. So the winemaker basically makes sure that the conditions are right for it to turn into wine and to go through the complete process.
What are they? What are those conditions?
And that is basically that it comes in good contact with the yeasts. That's one thing, the constant making sure that it comes in contact with the yeasts. The temperature control is very important. The cleanliness. Contrary to way many people have, I've found many people telling me that it doesn't have to be clean. On the contrary, wine, when you produce wine, you need a very clean place, and everything has to be clean. And make sure that, you don't have, extra bacterias or other wild, yeasts around that will deter and that will take over and ruin the product. So these are the basic, basics in producing wine, is making sure that the place is clean and that you have good grapes and that the yeast come in contact with the grapes and the temperature is not too hot or too cold. And then as that happens, you taste the wines and you see and you test them and you see how the fermentation is going along. You can have a fermentation take place in 3-4 days, 5 days, and you have the whole fermentation finished.
Yeah, you can have a complete wine in 4 days, 5 days?
You won't have a complete wine, you'll have a complete fermentation. And then it will take you another day or two for it to settle down, to clean out, to get clean, and cold stabilize it. And you can have within 10 days a wine, basically. And then you have certain wines that you will want it to ferment longer and take slower and go real slow, and that way you develop certain, the fermentation picks up qualities of this grape that were there all along that through a quick fermentation you will not taste and you will not feel.
And what is this aging process?
And then comes the aging process. Now most wines in the world, 95% of the wines in the world are drunk within the first year or of production. In other words, whatever was produced in 94, by next year, summertime has been drunk already. There's a very minute amount of wine which come from certain vintages, certain vineyards, where you will age where those wines can be aged. And that wine in particular, for that wine to be aged, has to fall into certain criteria of the grapes being high in tannin, very good quality. It would have kind of an astringent quality in the first few years of its life. And as it ages, and that all depends,
Where does it age?
Usually you'd be aging it in barrels. I mean, you could even age it sometimes in bottles it will develop as well.
Even once it's bottled?
Even once it's bottled. But these are specialty, these are wines that are, again, it's like...
So when you put in a wine into a bottle, once it's already bottled, does it continue to age?
Sure, definitely. Definitely. It has a limited shelf life. Now, most wines have a shelf life of 1-2 years. There are certain wines that will have a shelf life of 10 years,
even
and
in
to extreme cases to 20 years.
Okay, for all those who want to learn more about winemaking and the art of winery, you can call Mr. Joseph Zakon at 718-604-1430, certainly a Brooklyn number. And if you want to contact the show, we do want to hear from you. You can write to us at A Cable to Jewish Life, 383 Kingston Avenue, Suite 323, Brooklyn, New York, 11213. Okay, we're just about wrapping up. We got a minute. What's your closing message about wine?
Okay, there's something very interesting about wine that I find fascinating, and that is, I will always ask the question is, what is the most spoken about at the table and the least consumed? And the answer usually is wine. Everything else is spoken about and consumed constantly. Wine is something that people will speak about and not consume as much
And
as
the message.
and as much as the rest of the products. And the reason for that is because wine, people find it fascinating. And I say, fine, you know, wine is a fascinating subject, but it's very important that you should drink what you like.
It has to be measured and controlled. And to you, our listeners, l'chaim to you all. Celebrate your holidays. Drink wine. L'chaim to Yossi Zakon, l'chaim to us all. And let us hope that we will very soon merit to drink the wine that we will have with Mashiach. And until then, we wish you the traditional bracha v'atzlacha and all the best.
אני מאמין באמונו של אמו בביאת המשיח אני מאמין אני מאמין באמונו של אמו בביאת המשיח אני
It's holiday time again. Get your free holiday guide for this holiday and all future holidays. Call our toll-free number, 1-888-LIFE-CHAI. That's 1-888-543-3242. Or email to us on the internet at holiday@cablejew.org for your free guides to all Jewish holidays. Even the call is free. 1-888-LIFE-CHAI. We wish you a very happy holiday.
Everybody press, let's go!
Given Chabad's continuing effort to educate, as the Passover holiday draws near, children from all backgrounds are treated to a miniature operation of a traditional matzah bakery at Chabad centers throughout the country. They are given a lesson in history about their biblical ancestors who made a hasty departure from Egypt without giving their bread enough time to rise. When the children and their families leave the premises of the model bakery, they are given the special round shmura matzahs baked in Crown Heights for use at their seders. The water in a specially supervised flour must be kept from becoming moist and are kept in separate rooms and then mixed in a bowl, and in rapid succession they are hand kneaded. Flattened by carefully sanded and inspected rolling pins,